Welcome to Veterans Archives, where we preserve the stories of our nation's heroes in their own words and their own voices. Today is February 15th, 2023, and we are talking with Nathan Moran about his personal history. So let's start out from the very beginning. When and where were you born?
I was born 24th November 1981 in Plainville, Michigan, in Pitt Hospital. My parents were Shelley Roberts and Thomas Moran.
All right. And so have you grown up in Michigan your whole life?
I grew up in Michigan my whole life, except for the time I spent 4 years living in Japan.
Okay. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So let's talk a little bit about your family and about growing up. So can you kind of maybe talk a little bit about what your childhood was like? Did you have any brothers and sisters?
I had one sister, and eventually I had a half brother. We grew up in kind of middle class until fourth grade. I ended up moving in with my dad, and it was a pretty rough childhood, pretty rough family life.
Okay. What are some of your memories about your father?
He was always working and always trying to provide for me and made sure that we had everything that we needed. We didn't have extra, but we always had the necessities we needed.
Okay. Well, that's really nice. What about your mom? What are some of your memories of your mom?
She was always trying to help others and would always give the last that she had for anybody in need.
Okay. And if we think about your parents, if you really kind of thought hard about it, like what's one of your favorite memories of your father?
That I saw him trying all the time to work. I mean, I would watch him work 18-hour days, 7 days a week, just to try to get ahead.
Okay. And then what about your mom? What would maybe be one of your favorite memories of your mother?
When I was little, she took us to the Fun Factory in Kalamazoo, and that was the first time I remember going there. And that's probably one of the few memories I have of her actually taking us anywhere.
Okay. And I'm not familiar with the Fun Factory. Is that like a Chuck E. Cheese sort of place?
Yeah, it was like the original Dave and Buster's.
Okay. All right. Well, sounds like a good time. Now you did mention that you have a sister and a half brother. Can you tell me a little bit about your sister and maybe how old were when she came along?
My sister is just under 2 years younger than me. Uh, she's always had a huge heart, especially for animals. Like, oh my God, we get in arguments about it because she loves animals so much and will forego everything to take care of them. Um, she's a amazing mom who always tries hard to do better than what she had when she was younger. Because again, had a rough childhood. My half brother, he is 9 years younger than me, and he also ended up joining the military. He's always trying hard, always trying to get better than what he had when we were little, because he had a rough childhood also.
Okay. And what's your sister's name?
Danielle
Okay. And your brother's name?
is Dylan.
Okay. All right. So growing up, do you remember like grade school? What kinds of things did you do as you were going through school?
If I remember correctly, I attended 4 different schools by fourth grade. We were constantly moving. I think I lived in 7 different houses in 4 years until I moved in with my dad in 4th grade. And then that's when finally got stability, 1 house, 1 school.
Okay. And what school did you go to?
The one that I attended the longest was Plainwell,
Okay.
and, also my grandparents, both sets, helped raise me a lot while my dad was working.
All right. And how do you think that influenced your life?
I think it really gave me a great foundation because it gave me the old school worth ethic. It gave me how a relationship is supposed to be, and also respect for your significant other and uh, your elders.
Okay. And then those are all good qualities. So as you're going through school, did you go to Plainwell High School then too?
That's correct.
All right. And what kinds of things did you do in high school for fun?
I worked a lot. As soon as I was, I think, 12, I started doing paper routes, and I have not stopped working since then.
Well, that's that's at your age, that's quite a number of years of having worked. So after high school, what happened? What'd you do?
I got picked up for an apprenticeship after attending 2 years electromechanical engineering at my vocational school.
Hmm.
I got picked up for my first apprenticeship at Tyson. No, not Tyson. Heinz in Holland, and that was around 2000. And I started my apprenticeship, lived on my own by myself. I think I was 17 when I moved out.
And what was that like to support yourself and be on your own? Was that a good, kind of a good feeling, or how was that for you?
It made me realize how much my dad had to work to provide for me. And it gave you a real sense of how much money is worth and how many hours that you have to put in to get the things that you want.
Okay. And so you're kind of chugging along, you're in your apprenticeship, you're out on your own. At some point, you joined the Navy. Now, how did that happen?
A lot of the guys at work, they never went anywhere. Maybe Mexico, but they never went anywhere. The veterans that I worked with, they had the best stories, jumping out of airplanes, going to foreign ports. Um, while I was living on my own in Holland, nobody came to visit me. I was pretty much just alone, and I'd have to drive an hour to go see my family. After 9/11 happened, I watched it when I was going to first break. I think the first plane had already crashed, and it was before the second plane hit. We watched it through our break, and it was shortly after there, I think about a month or two, is when I decided to join the Navy because I figured if I just do one hitch, I'll have more travel in one 4 or 5 year contract than most people have in an entire lifetime.
Well, that's true. I think the old thing was join the Navy and see the world, and that was my experience. I want to talk a little bit, though. I want to go back a little bit. What made you choose the Navy? I mean, there's a lot of different services you could have joined. Why the Navy?
Because I had an uncle, Steve, who was in during Persian Gulf War One, and he told me about all the different ports he got to go to on his aircraft carrier. So I figured if I joined the Navy, I would be able to see the most amount of stuff than out of the other branches. Because the Army guys, they usually would get stationed at one place and they wouldn't go anywhere. And you got to figure a lot of those guys never deployed because they weren't in a war. Um, I didn't really know any Marines. I didn't know any Air Force people. So it was pretty much down to the Army and the Navy, and I figured I'd travel more if I was in the Navy.
Okay. All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about that. So you decide to join the Navy. You end up going to basic training. Where did you go to basic training at?
Uh, Great Lakes in Chicago.
Mhm.
It was the last boot camp left. They closed down all the other ones, and everybody that joins the Navy has to go through Great Lakes now.
And so what can you kind of describe what that was like for you to get off that bus and that very first few minutes that you're at basic training?
It was pretty much, oh my God, what did I do?
You were questioning your own judgment at that point, huh?
I've for quite a few months after that, I was questioning what I was doing. I joined when I was 20, and I remember calling the recruiter and saying, "Hey, I think I'm too old to join, but will you take a 20-year-old?" And he kind of laughed and said, "Oh yeah, we'll take them."
So can you talk about some of the things that you experienced in boot camp?
I learned attention to detail very quick, um, how to get along with multiple different types of people from multiple different segments of society. Coming from a small town, you really didn't have the diversity as in a bigger city. But I get along with everybody, and I'm always trying to be friends with people. And I learned quickly that if you just do what you're told, they leave you alone, and you can just continue mission.
Now, did you make any really good friends while you were in basic training?
Not really that I can remember. Uh, I just remember being really hectic, and it was a big push after 9/11. So there was a lot of people coming in, a lot of people rotating out. Um, I think we started out with 120, and by the time we graduated, I think it was less than 70.
So a lot of people washed out or got retreaded.
Oh yeah, and that
Okay.
doesn't even count the people that rotated into our division.
Okay. Do you have any like do you have like one or two memories that just kind of stick out about basic training for you? Like when you think about basic training, this is what you think about.
Uh, one guy really hated toenails, like hated toenails. And apparently some people got together, collected a bunch of toenails and fingernails, and then made a nice little pile right on top of his clothes. And he completely lost it.
Yeah, never show your weakness, right? Don't limp in the
Right.
jungle. So you finish up basic training and you head off to school. So what job did you end up taking in the Navy?
I ended up taking a electrician's mate because I was an electrician before, and I really liked doing electrical, and I wanted to ship. So that's why I picked that one. When I originally went to MEPS, they said they didn't have any electricians made jobs. So I said, okay, well, I'll just wait here. My recruiter came and said, you ready to go? You sign your paper? I said, nope. They said Navy's full. They don't have any jobs. And I'm just going to go home and be an electrician again. So he ended up buying them lunch, and they magically found an electrician's mate job.
Funny how that stuff happens, isn't
Yep.
it? So where did you go to electrician's mate school?
I stayed in Chicago, um, and completed my basic electrical courses and my engineering common core until I finally made it to A school, still in Chicago. They put all the electricians and electrical jobs in the brand new barracks, 6301. So everyone just called it the Hilton because it was up on a hill and it was brand new.
Sounds like a good experience.
It was not bad compared to the engineering barracks that we had come from that were tore down relatively shortly thereafter. think it was barracks 333, if I remember right.
Probably some of the barracks I was in when I was there way back in the day.
Very possible.
Yeah. I think I was there when you were 6 years old, by the way, just so you know.
Well, I mean, when I was in the Army, we were still staying in World War II barracks
Hmm.
at Camp Custer
Yeah.
or Fort Custer.
Oh yeah, I remember those days too. So you get done with your electrician's mate training, and then did you head out to the fleet after that?
Yeah, before we graduated, they had a list of all the ships and duty stations in the world. And when I was looking at the list, I saw a ship called the USS Patriot. I was like, oh, that sounds like a nice boat. And it's in Sasebo, Japan. And it was a minesweeper. So the smaller the boat, the more you learn, the quicker you rank up. So I said, well, that'd probably be a good one to get on. And when we went to go do our dream sheets, the USS Patriot was on it. And I said, that's obviously that's meant for me because I saw it. And my detailer goes, that's a minesweeper. I said, I know. He goes, I'll let you pick again. And I said, I still want to go to the USS Patriot. He goes, I don't think you're listening to me. That's a minesweeper. You can pick again. And I said, that's fate that one popped up. So I'm taking that one. He goes, okay, that's where you're going. You're going to the USS Patriot then.
And so I'm assuming you went home on leave and then went off to Japan. How did that work once you left EM school?
I'd been going home on weekends because I figured out if I took the Metro from Great Lakes to the Amtrak in Chicago, the Wolverine Express would drop me off in Kalamazoo. So when I had long weekends or no duty, I was going back home on the weekends. And my grandma or grandpa would pick me up. So I did 30 days leave before I went over. And I just tried to hang out with my grandparents a lot and try to spend as much time as I could with them because I knew that more than likely I wasn't going to come home for quite a while.
Right, right, absolutely. Well, what was it like arriving in Japan? What was your first day there like?
When I got there, I'd never really flown before. So flying to boot camp was my first time on an airplane. And that was pretty wild for me. For some reason, it seemed like it took 17 hours to get from Kalamazoo to Sasebo. And I just remember the airplane stewardess were so nice. And they were always trying to bring me food. But on those flights at that time, there was no movies or TV screens or cell phones. So it was pretty much just 17 hours sitting next to a older Japanese man who must have smoked 3 packs of cigarettes before he got on a plane and just ate about 4 pounds of Nicorette gum.
Sounds like a really enjoyable flight, Nathan.
I was like, this is awful. But it was because it really seemed like it was 17 hours to get there. And I'd never been on, that was the second time I've been on a plane.
Mhm.
And I packed nothing because we were told don't bring anything with you. So I had no books, no anything, no movies, no music. It was just a very long flight. When I landed in Japan, I got picked up in Fukuoka at night, driven to my base, and I had found out that my ship wasn't there. It was in Tokyo for the annual training. And that would have been, I think the beginning of November of 2002 is when I got there. It was before I turned 21. And when everyone found out what boat I was on, they just said, I'm sorry, and you're going to have a long time.
How'd that make you feel?
Uh, I was still full of everything. So I said, please don't say anything negative. I'm trying to have a positive outlook on this. And I know that I'm going to have quite a while on this boat. So I just would like to figure it out on my own. And I just want to be positive about it.
Okay. Now, how long was it before your boat came back, or did you go to Tokyo to meet it?
It was a couple weeks, I think, before they got there. They didn't know where to put me, so they put me on a berthing barge of the Fort McHenry or Harper's Ferry. And they found out that I wasn't a part of that crew. So after a couple days with no supervision, they made me leave. And then I went and moved into the barracks of the USS Patriot and the USS Guardian, because the ships were considered not habitable to live on all the time, like the big ships. So we would have barracks rooms.
Okay. And what was that 2 weeks like where you weren't really at the ship yet? So what kind of things did you do while you were there?
They would let us out, and never traveling when I was younger. I mean, maybe Ohio, maybe Chicago once each, but it was just like the mountains of Japan were just amazing, and the scenery and the people were so nice, and the technology was like 10 years ahead of anything that we had. I mean, it was the arcade games everywhere, and just learning how to navigate and ride in my first taxi. I'd never ridden in a taxi before. And I was just kind of kept to myself, because when I got transferred to the barracks, nobody was there from the ship yet.
Hmm. Now, did you make some friends, or did you hang out with some people when you first got there, when you were out kind of traveling around?
Nope, I really didn't hang out with anybody, and because you have to be really careful with who you hang out with in the military. I mean, it only takes one thing to happen and your entire career is over with. So I've always been kind of independent. And if I was by myself, then that means I could control what was going on, and I didn't have to worry about any misunderstandings or depending on someone else to lead me astray.
Hmm. All right. Well, and that all makes a lot of sense. Now, once your boat got back, what was it like meeting the new people, and what kinds of things did you do?
When my ship got back, I was waiting for him on the pier, and there might have been a couple other guys. I got on the boat, and I was in the PN or YN's office. They were trying to get me situated. And I remember Ian Freiberger coming in and saying, "Oh, I'm here to help you. I'm your first class, and I just want to make sure you succeed here. And do you have any schools? Oh, you don't have any schools." And I said, "Oh, Ian, I have electrician's mate school." He goes, "Oh, another electrician? Never mind." And he walked out.
Well,
And
that's interesting. He was was he hoping it was another engineering person?
yep. And then finally, someone came and got me and brought me into the electrician shop, which you might be able to get like 4 phone booths in there. It was just enough room to lay on the floor. And IC2 Kane was on security that day, so he was carrying around a 9 mil. And he comes up and he said, "Hey, I'm IC2 Kane, and I'm your work center supervisor." And I was a fireman at the time still. He goes, "How long do you have here?" And I said, "Well, I probably have 3 years, but it's probably going to turn into 4 years." So that he pulled his 9 mm out, gave it to me, and then told me that I should just kill myself now because no one's going to make it 4 years here. He said, tried to give it to me, and I just said, I'm trying to keep a positive attitude, so, and I don't think you're supposed to be doing that. He's like, "Okay, it's your choice." Put it back in his holster and walked out. And that was my first day on my boat.
And how'd that make you feel? Because it sounds to me like you had this really positive attitude the whole time, and but everyone was negative. And so were you kind of wondering what that was all about?
A little bit, because when you're in boot camp and you graduate and they tell you that when you go to fleet, that you're going to be a part of this brotherhood. And just the atmosphere of the ship was so heavy that again, it made me like, what did I do? Like, why did I pick this boat? Um, it was it was a rough time on that boat. It wasn't the crew, it was the leadership and the style boat we had. Is what made it hard.
Well, what were some of your work duties? What kind of things did you do on the boat?
I took care of all the shipboard electrical equipment, day-to-day operations with that, the galley equipment. I didn't have the school, but all the electricians are minesweepers. So I had to work on the minesweeping details because we would pulse the water with 5,000 amps of DC to simulate the magnetic signature of other ships. And also we were able to replicate the acoustic signature of any ship in the fleet. I also had to be on the bridge for helm for driving the boat. And I also had to do bow thruster. We were very small. It was about 80 guys, give or take one or two at any time on that boat. So I had the hot rack when I first got there. And the guy I had the hot rack with had like really large like canines. So he would drool in his sleep and just have like white drool coming down his face. So I just slept in the electrical shop until I got my own rack.
Yeah, I could only imagine that. So you spent the whole 4 years there, though, right? You actually did 4 years in Japan on that particular boat.
I did. I did about a year with school, with boot camp and everything, and then I spent 4 years on board that ship.
All right, and so I mean, is anything from your time on that particular ship? I know you shared the story about when you met your work center supervisor, but is there anything else that you really kind of remember? Is there like a really good memory you have when you think about your time there in Japan?
The best part of that ship was there were so little people in there that you really got to know everybody. Like everybody, for the most part, all got along with each other. And we were constantly on 6 and 6 rotation. And we had a 3-section duty day for 4 years. So you got to learn everyone's family and all their stories. And by the time you're done, when they leave or you leave, it's like their family's your family. And I know that wherever I go in the world, if I run across one of the guys I was on the Patriot with, that I have a family, that it could be 20 years since we've seen each other, but it'll be like not even a day has passed and we can pick up on that friendship again. I still talk to more people from the Navy than I do the Army, just because that ship was so hard and the schedule was so awful that we have a mutual suffering that we all went through together. Because you knew that when you woke up, it was not going to be any better than the day before. No matter what you did, no matter how hard you tried, it was just going to be a little worse the next day. And it was just compounding. Again, it was the COs and XOs that we had, especially, we call it the Mattingly years, because our XO was so strict and the standard was so high that it was just, it was awful. I know guys that still are dealing this day with how awful it was on that ship. And I mean, it's 20 years later and I'm still getting phone calls about guys that want to talk about what happened on that boat because it was so awful.
Now, it's interesting, though, if we think about it, that when you got there and your work center supervisor hands you the gun and says you might as well just shoot yourself now, and you were kind of questioning where that brotherhood was, it sounds like you kind of found that brotherhood even through all the difficulty of being on the boat. Did you feel like that sort of part of the deal came through, like you had these brothers now and these families now that you didn't have before?
It did over time, because you have to pay your dues and people have to learn about you and where you came up, and you can change how things are. So the young kids that came in after I got there, I really tried hard to help them out. And if they didn't have a Liberty buddy, I would make sure to, as long as I knew they were good people, I would take them out. Or we had a guy who was on restriction and I would take him out because I could make sure that he wouldn't get in trouble, but he could at least get off the boat for a little while. And it did. I think it was how hard that ship was because of how high of a standard we were, that really made it hard. We ran aground on that boat. We were in dry dock 2 different times. I think we had 2 or 3 Pentagon inspections, 3 Testa cycles. I had 5 captains in 4 years.
Now, did you ever go out and do like actual minesweep type work?
No, it was always training. We had to be on standby 24 hours a day because the waters of North Korea are so heavily mined. And we're still considered forward deployed. So we're on a forward deployed schedule. So we were able to go and minesweep with the Japanese Navy, the Korean Navy. I think we did the Thai Navy one time. British, I think we went with the British once for the 50th anniversaries of the armistice.
Mm-hmm.
We went to Incheon for one, and we went to Busan for the other.
Now, did you get to meet or do things with your counterparts from the different navies?
Not too much, because again, the boats were so small. There was a couple times that we went out and we ran into the CO, the XO, the first lieutenant, the Marine Sergeant Major of the flagship Bungo, and we partied with them for a while. And when I got back to the boat and my engineering officer found out who I was with, banned us from hanging out with any other Japanese officers.
Oh, that's pretty harsh.
Well, I think the CEO was trying to get my buddy to marry his daughter right there and then. And yeah, we just weren't allowed to hang out with officers from foreign militaries anymore after that.
Oh, well, okay, understandable. Understandable. So you did your time in Japan. When it was time to rotate out, were you getting out of the Navy then?
Yes, I was getting out because we'd have guys who would come to the boat and they would say their ship was worse. And I just couldn't fathom being on a worse boat than that. Like I couldn't understand how it was possible. I'd already made E5 and I was getting ready to take my E6 exam. I was always in the top 10 percentile for my test. When I made E5, I was in the top 99 percentile. I had all the big billet PQSs, engineering duty officer. I mean, I volunteered for everything, ship store, all the Comrail projects, working at orphanages, and I was so burned out. We lost a lot of good guys on that boat because they were so burned out and so jaded by how everything was. However, when I got out, it was in 07, and I started working construction as an electrician again. And that was not the time to be working construction.
Well, that's true. Let me ask you this question though. What was it like transitioning from being in the Navy and kind of being in that environment to coming back and working in the civilian world? How was that for you?
Um, it was rough. We've been pushed for so hard for the past 5 years to attention to detail, number one in everything. And then you come back to the civilian world and the motivation isn't there for most people. I was a pretty angry individual. That was for sure. I think there's two types of PTSD. There's combat related PTSD and I guess mental PTSD from strenuous things you had been through. And I think that I had a lot of PTSD from the boat. And a lot of guys that I talked to after we got out, they have the same. And I was just angry for giving all that time, not being deployed overseas because our ship was so small it couldn't deploy overseas. Just every day was horrible. And I think I had a lot of anger and I didn't know how to deal with it. Lots of sleep deprivation, which really can throw yourself out of whack for a long time. And then trying to raise a family in the 08 when everything crashed. So I was working a full-time job, a part-time job, and I was going to college 3/4 of the time and doing all of that just to try to provide enough money to raise my family.
Okay, so let's talk about that for a minute. When did you start a family?
It would have, I had my oldest son, David was born in October 4th of 2004 is when he was born. And when I moved, we came back in '07, and I just wanted to spend all my time with my family and trying to raise them and give them better than I had. We were gone a lot on the boat because it was so small we could just leave at any time.
Was your family with you in Japan then?
They were. My
Okay.
ex-wife was Japanese, and I didn't come back to the States for 3 years.
Okay.
It was 3 years before I even stepped foot back in the States for 30 days of leave, and then went back over for another year. And it was a huge culture shock. It was like I didn't want to come back to the States because everything was so much better over there.
Mhm. So,
But
what was your wife's name? Can you tell me?
Naoko,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Naoko,
Naoko?
Nakagawachi.
And how did you meet?
Uh, I was in Fukuoka, and I was hanging out with one of my friends' girls that were a friend because I was so bored. She said that she would be my kind of tour guide, and
Mhm.
I said that's fine. I just have to get out of Sasebo, and I want to see stuff. We went to a mall, and I got on an escalator, and when I got to the top of the escalator, someone called out to me, and I looked down. It was another American sailor. And he's like, "Hey, what's going on?" I was like, "Not much," and that was the end of it. Uh, about a week or two later, I saw him at the barracks, and he ended up introducing me to my ex-wife.
Okay. And so how long were you married?
9 years.
All right. Now, so they came back with you to the States when you moved back.
That's correct.
Okay. What's your son's name?
My oldest is David, and my youngest is John, and they're both named after family members. And because I wanted to have heritage in their names and being the family genealogist, that's really important to me is to have heritage.
Understandable. And so, you have both of your sons with your ex-wife then?
That is correct.
Okay. So you come back to the States, you're trying to make things work, you're working a job and a half basically, and um 2008 comes along, and that's when everything kind of fell apart for a lot of people. So what happened at that point?
I decided to change my career. I started working third shift security so I could go to college during the day, and I could study and do homework on third shift. I started going for law enforcement, and I figured that the National Guard would look good on my resume, and it would give me a chance to make a little extra money. So I joined the Army National Guard, but I felt like cheated because I didn't get deployed.
Mhm.
It was '08. We've been at war for, 7 years, 6, 7 years by that time. Um, I just didn't feel like I'd done enough. So I figured if I went infantry, I was almost guaranteed a deployment overseas. Got a special waiver for my hearing, and that allowed me to get into the Guard. And I pretty much did that schedule for years.
So what unit were you with in the National Guard?
I was with the first of the 125th Charlie Company out of Grand Rapids, Michigan.
Okay. And so you never deployed as part of that unit?
I deployed in 2012,
Okay.
as we were told that we were going to do full spectrum operations. They boosted our numbers, and we probably spent a year training up for it. We were in Camp Grayling for a long time. Then ended up down in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, and that's where we started our MOB.
Very familiar with Hattiesburg. That's Camp Shelby, right?
That's correct.
Okay. What was that like for you?
That was it. It really wasn't that bad. I mean, when I compared it to being in the Navy, it wasn't that bad. I didn't have to stand watch as much. As long as you got done what you had to get done, you're good to go. Even the heat wasn't as bad as when I was down by the equator in Thailand. But there was some pretty memorable stuff there. We had someone lose a pair of night vision goggles and spent 3 or 4 days as I think a battalion walking everywhere to look for a pair of night vision. And it turned out that one of the Terps stole it and was trying to sell it on eBay.
Oh my gosh. That's not good.
Nope. We ended up going to NTC in California, Fort Irwin.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe they said it was the worst dust storm in 100 years. And we were stuck out there trying to keep this giant circus tent from blowing down. And it really wasn't that bad. The showers were awful because California is energy conscious. So they just had black hoses running out into the desert. So there was a total of about 10 minutes of hot water. And then it was just ice cold to the point where some of us stopped showering. We just wash our hair, but the cold water was so cold that you'd get an instant migraine from the water. Then they rotated us back to Camp Shelby, and they changed their mission. So they pretty much divided our company and battalion in half. They pretty much sent half the guys home. They sent another large portion to another unit. I volunteered for COIST, which was company intelligence team.
Mm-hmm.
And I got picked up for that and ended up making the Advon party. So while we were waiting for that, it was New Year's 2011 going into 2012. And we found out that my lieutenant rented a hotel in New Orleans. So 8 of us got together and crashed this hotel and ended up just sleeping in his hotel for the night.
What was that night like?
Oh, it's great. I got to see a lot of stuff, and a lot of my buddies had way more fun than I did. So, but it was just, I read a lot of history when I was younger. So going to these places that I was able to go to in the Navy and in the Army, I didn't look at it as, oh, hey, this is New Orleans, or like, hey, this is Hiroshima, or this Nagasaki, or anything like that. It was the historical part. So like when we went to Vietnam in '06, we went with the USS Grapple out of Hawaii. We were the first ones in Saigon or Ho Chi Minh City since the evacuation in '75. So that was like a huge deal for me because I had a lot of my dad's friends that were Vietnam vets, and I knew Vietnam vets. And it was just, how lucky am I to be here? I got to go to Nagasaki, Hiroshima, and visit those places. And I think '05, we got selected to go to Vladivostok, Russia. And I remember the end of the Cold War. So when we went to the orphanage, I found a girl who was about my age. She wasn't an orphan, but her mother worked at the orphanage. So it was just great to sit down and talk with someone my age about the Cold War. I mean, how lucky was I to be able to go and get selected to go to that? Because nowadays, especially right now, you're not going to Russia. You know, you probably aren't going to Vietnam. There's a lot of places that you can't go to now because of how things are. So I was very fortunate, and that's the part of the Navy I loved, was going to a new place all the time. I mean, all over Korea. My grandfather served in the 7th Infantry Division during the Korean War as a recon scout. I got to go to the War Memorial in Seoul and take pictures for him and get him things that were celebrating what he did for the South Korean people and bringing them back to him. That's how I got my Korean Defense Service Medal, as for how much time we spent in Korea. And that was just a great feeling to come home and give him that, and just tell him that I am the way I am because of him. All the social clubs he joined, I joined. He was an electrician, I was an electrician. He was in the infantry, and I was in the infantry. So I was lucky for that. I would go through it all over again just for that aspect. But I try to tell people it's not easy, you know. I mean, you know that yourself.
Right.
There's some really trying times, and you know, a buddy of mine was on the Lincoln, and they were gone for 18 months. I mean, that's a long time.
That definitely is. Well, and speaking of being gone for a long time, so if we go kind of back to where we left the story, you crashed this party in New Orleans prior to deployment. So you're at Hattiesburg at Camp Shelby. You go make a mess out of your lieutenant's room, I'm sure. I was a lieutenant once myself. I know how some of that works. So where did you end up deploying to?
We flew out, landed in Bangor, Maine. Then we went to Shannon, Ireland, Leipzig, Germany, ended up in Kyrgyzstan, and everyone called it Manas. From Manas, we were there for quite a while, waiting to actually go to Afghanistan. It was probably a group of maybe 15 of us, because we're the advance party. We landed in Mazar Sharif, which is the big fob in northern Afghanistan. And we were there for a while doing all the IED training and the briefs rules of engagement briefs, and getting climatized to the weather. From there, we got on a German helicopter, which I'd never ridden in a German helicopter before, or any helicopter. So I was just like, man, it's great.
Pretty cool,
Oh, yeah. And the Germans, they started to give us a safety brief, and then they found out we're infantry, and they're like, oh, you guys are infantry. Don't worry about it. Just get on the helicopter.
huh?
They flew us out to what I was told was the second smallest COP in Afghanistan, and Imam Sahib, called COP Fortitude. It was currently being manned by the 170th, and the unit that was there was the 218th Bravo Company, I do believe. And it was in quite the disrepair when we landed there. We landed in a soccer field surrounded by people. And as we were, because you had to walk out of the LZ, make a left, walk down the road, and then the front of the COP, because there was only one entrance into COP Fortitude. They didn't have a gate or a wall. They just had a truck parked in between some HESCOs, and that was the only thing separating us from the outside world.
And so what was it like for you? What were you thinking when you got there?
It was, the amount of people was just mind-boggling, and they're all hanging on the fence, watching the helicopters come in. And when we were walking, I kept hearing like little explosions. And once we got in there, the EOD, I think it was, said that people were throwing welcome IEDs, just little tiny ones, to welcome us there.
Wow, that's not a very good welcome. So what was your mission there?
Our mission was, I think it was QRF for an SF compound, was one of them, but we really didn't do that very much. The other one was, we had an SFAT team who would go out and meet with the local leaders
Mm-hmm.
and kind of ask them like what they wanted, intel, things like that. I worked on the list a while ago. I think there's only usually 60 people out there at a time. So we were a very small base, and we really didn't have very many people. I think we were 2 hours away from our closest fob, which was a fob conduce. And that's where we started to take over the missions from the 170th and start slowly bringing in our guys.
So what was it like an average day like while you were there?
In the beginning, it was going through a lot of the intel, seeing what was relevant, what wasn't relevant, setting things up to brigade, a lot of tower duty, lots of tower duty. And eventually I went from the company intelligence back down into my platoon level as a team leader.
Mm-hmm. All right. And so were you ever involved in anything there? You know, did they ever try to attack the COP that you were at, or was it a pretty quiet area? What was that like?
It was weird. What I was told was Imam Sahib was the hub for drugs and weapons and money. We were right next to a police station that had a small prison inside. And we were there for a while, just running missions. I think the Archie was the name of the city where they were doing a lot of work at the time. And it was when the guy burned the Koran. And you could see where they were attacking, and it was slowly coming up towards our cop. And one of the Terps said that, hey, they're gonna come protest, but don't worry about it, it'll be okay. Then a few days later, he's like, hey, they're coming, and they're pretty mad. And the day before, he goes, I'm getting out of here. These guys are going to do something. So we did the best we could and tried to improve the defensive positions we had. That morning, I was on the front gate with a couple other guys, and we heard a protest down the road. And that morning, some truck dumped an entire load of bricks right in front of our cop, like across the street. And we called it up because it looked weird, but you couldn't see any other compounds, so we thought maybe they're doing construction. So we're waiting on the gate, and we see this Afghan police officer with a machine gun, and he's just spraying down the road, just not looking anywhere, just spraying it down the road. And that's when we went to security and manned up the positions. I transitioned from the front gate to the front wall on a 240 machine gun. And lots of people started showing up at that time. I got my relief came to relieve me, and his name was Bueno Fuentes, I do believe. He was a Marine and just happened to come along with us on that deployment. I climbed down the ladder and I start walking to my secondary position, which was on the south wall next to my team leader at the time, Sergeant Foy. And as I'm climbing up the ladder, I saw smoke coming from behind the truck. And I thought that, well, that was a weird place to throw a smoke grenade. And that's when they started calling the medevacs. Pretty much our entire SVAT team had a grenade blow up right in the center of them. The guy that relieved me off the machine gun, he got shrapnel in his safety glasses, his forehead, his face. And they couldn't land. They've never landed helicopters inside a cop because it was so small. They told us to go outside in the protesters and go to the LZ to get the guys out. I think there's 10 or 12 that had to be medevaced out, which is a large group for only having 50, 60 guys. That was not an option. Thankfully, we had an incredible First Sergeant Birch, who everything could have really went bad if he wouldn't have been there. We moved trucks around. We had just enough area to, when the Blackhawks were coming in, they were just clearing the cement barriers and the HESCOs, but nothing was secured. So as they're landing, entire pieces of plywood are flying around in the air, and there's probably only 20 feet on either side of the rotor blades. And then as they're going to leave, they're just barely clearing the other cement walls. And they did that. I think they must have did that like 5-6 times. And when they finally get the protesters to go away, we had 2 Air Force personnel, and I was on top of the HESCO, and someone said they're coming. I didn't understand what they were saying. And as soon as I looked in front of me, I saw the pilot in a jet looking at me. And it was like time stopped. And then he took off, and I could feel the skin of my face burning because they were that close and that low. And that made the protesters leave. And then they came back. And then I hear someone go, they're coming again. And then I look in front of me again, and there's another jet, and I'm looking at the pilot in the face, and he's looking at me, and he takes off just as low and just as fast, and you can just feel his afterburner burning your skin because they were that close. We took a lot of rounds. They threw a lot of bricks and rocks. We were very, very fortunate. We had the top National Guard surgeon for the state of Texas, Colonel Caldwell, who was a British citizen, and him and the medics we had thankfully saved all those guys' lives. There is probably almost everyone in the SFAT team almost lost all their legs. I mean, it was pretty scary time. And what bothered me was it didn't seem like our command had taken it serious.
Mm-hmm.
We were still missing an entire platoon. We really didn't have anything to deal with the protesters. Just a couple rubber rounds. After that, that's when they actually brought us like bear mace and non-lethal rounds, and they sent material to build extra towers, because behind us was the girls' school, and we do overwatch on the girls' school to give them security so they could attend school.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like a lot of stuff going on the whole time you're there. Were you there for a year then?
I think we were the first unit to try the 9-month program, where
Okay.
you just go there for 9 months straight. You don't get to come home and stay a year. And that was when they were starting to tear down a lot of the cops and starting to pull back into the fobs and starting to turn over things to the Afghans. And like I said, that was back in 2012.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So when did you rotate back to the States?
I think it was August, probably August is when we started to come back. We did a lot of escort missions out of Conduce to the UN bases. We were QRF for anyone in the area. So we go out and help the Germans or anybody else that need help. Go out, look for IEDs. If someone found an IED, we'd go out and go help them. We worked with Navy EOD on supposed to be a big mission where we had to stay at, I think, a Afghan army base, and we really weren't too cool with that because they were all in the towers and we were not in the towers. So that part wasn't very great because you had to put your trust in them. And it, it kind of came and go. Like what during the protest happened, the guy leading the protest was the police chief that was right next to our cop. I mean, we got YouTube videos of him. We got YouTube videos of them attacking the base and the flights out. And, you just really couldn't trust them. We went and I talked to a village elder, and he was so excited that he had like 10 daughters. And the part he was so excited about was none of them could read.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh yeah, man, that's great. Why is that great that they can't read? And he said, well, they're worth more if they can't read. So it was, when we went over, it was, oh, it's just the crazies, and we're gonna go help these people. And then when we got there, it was, they're all crazy. Their religion and their lifestyle and morals are drastically different than our morals. So it was hard to see them doing things and our command saying, you can't say anything about it and don't worry about it and don't report it because that's their culture.
Mm-hmm.
Even though it was extremely morally wrong to us.
Well, understandable. And how does that feel when you're in that situation where it's against your ethics and morals, but it's just kind of how it is there?
You just have to, you just gotta deal with it. You're not going to change a culture that's been like that for thousands of years.
Mm-hmm.
As much as we want to, and we, because I mean, we want everybody to be American. I mean, really, we want you to feel safe and get an education and not worry about abuse and anything like that, and just be happy and be who you are. And when you're over there, it's just the exact opposite. We had to go to the police station next door, and there was a guy in there and his son. And we're like, well, what's this guy in here for? And they said that he murdered and tortured his wife because she was old and he wanted a younger wife, and he has to pay $100 fine to get out of jail. Like, it's hard to come home and tell people like this stuff really happens, and they don't believe you because nothing like that goes on here. It's not acceptable for that to go on here.
Right. Right.
I mean, all of it, the pedophilia that goes on over there that we were told to look away, the torturing animals in front of us, we were told just don't worry about it because that's their culture, and they knew that we like animals, so they would do it. I mean, I'd see kids almost slit other kids' throats over a piece of candy. It's the poverty is that bad, and the morals they have are just that awful. You're not going to change a culture like that in 20 years.
Right. Let alone in 9 months. Right.
Right. But you want to go there because we were raised on the World War II heroes, and we were raised on the heroics of Korea, and our GI Joes and our army guys, like especially someone my age, those were the Vietnam guys. And then we had Persian Gulf, where it was over and done with in a short time, but they had trading cards and all kinds of stuff like that. And we grew up like that. So we wanted to help and everything like that, but I just don't think that it was ever going to be possible in Afghanistan.
Right, right. And so you were there, you completed your tour, and you came home. What was coming home like for you?
Um, I didn't think I was coming home. Uh, my ex-wife said that she hoped that I didn't come home 3 times on 3 separate occasions. So I thought I was cursed and I was not coming home. So I would go over there and I would do every mission I could possibly get on. I would anything that my officers wanted to do or my senior leadership wanted me to do, I'd volunteer for it. I just didn't think I was coming home because no one who is supposed to care about you that much should ever say that to you,
Hmm.
especially after how hard I was working and how hard I was trying. So my family was gone when I got home, but my grandfather was the one that picked me up at the armory. And that meant so much to me because my grandpa was my hero and I wanted to be like him. He took me back to the family farm, and I remembered I took my combat infantry badge off and I said, Grandpa, I want you to have this. Like, you're my hero and I want you to have it. So he goes, I'll be right back. He goes in his room and he comes out and he gives me his CIB from the Korean War. And now I have both of them in my cabinet next to each other.
Must have been an amazing feeling.
It was. I was lucky enough to know how lucky I was to have my grandparents for as long as I did.
Hmm.
So I took all his Kodachrome slides from the war that he had left over. I had them all put on digital. And one night my grandma was gone to Indiana to go see my cousin. So I came over to check on my grandpa and I said, Hey grandpa, I want you to tell me some stories about the war. And he goes, Oh, I don't have any stories. I said, You don't gotta tell me those stories. I was like, we were both infantry. We both have our combat infantry badges. I want you to tell me the funny stories. And he sat down and talked to me for like 2 or 3 hours of all the funny stories that he could remember. I went through the photos. I said, tell me everything you know about this photo. And if you don't know anything, then we'll just, I'll just put you don't remember anything. So I was able to sit down with him and actually write down places and names and things that happened with him while he was still here. In 2018, we went on the Talons Out honor flight together. And I was able to escort him and 2 of his first cousins actually happened to be on the flight too to Washington, D.C. And I got to go to the Korean War Memorial with my grandpa. And I got to take a picture of him and his 2 first cousins in front of the Lincoln Memorial, and all 3 of them sitting in their wheelchair. I would have to say it wasn't more than 18 months later, all 3 of them were gone. But I recognized at an early age to listen to the old timers and write down stories and really appreciate while they're here. I mean, me and you're a little older than me, but we've seen the last World War I veteran. We're going to see the last World War II veteran. We're probably going to see the last Korea veteran. It's a good possibility we're going to see the last Vietnam veteran. And we have to tell them, like, thank you for setting the standard for the rest of us that that came after you.
Yeah, absolutely. So while we're talking about this, you didn't have the advantage to sit down with your grandfather and do what we're doing today. Can you remember, like, maybe just one of the stories he told you so we can preserve it here as well?
Um, he said that one time they had to clear rocks off from a road, and they were trying to use, I think, bazookas and pickaxes. So that wasn't working. So they got their hands on some C4, like a lot of C4, and they packed the rocks with all this C4 that they had. And he said they lit the fuse, but when they lit the fuse, their commanding officer was flying over in a helicopter. And he said his commander's last name was Smith. And it exploded. And then his helicopter almost lost control and crashed into a mountain.
Oh my gosh. So there you go. There's a story out of the Korean War for you. That's pretty amazing.
The one other one that I'd like to tell you is they're filling their tank up with napalm, and an officer came up with a Jeep and says, "Give me that hose." And they're like, "We don't think you want this." He's like, "I'm an officer and you give me that hose right now." So they said, "Okay." And the officer filled his Jeep gas tank up with napalm and took off. But my grandpa said they found the Jeep down the road a couple miles.
I'm not surprised. I am not surprised. So are you still in the National Guard, still serving in the National Guard?
Nope. I got out in 2014 because I got custody of my two boys, and I had to do what's best for them. And at the time, I had done so much. I mean, I got to go to live in Japan, travel all over Japan, Hong Kong, Singapore, Thailand, Vietnam, Russia, Malaysia, Brunei, Okinawa, South Korea, and then went to Europe after I got back from Afghanistan and traveled Ireland, Germany, France, Britain, Italy. Um, I had my combat infantry badge. I had my war medals, and I was just burned out. I thought I finally felt like I had done enough. Like because I know guys that did 20 years and never deployed one time,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes it's a roll of the dice. And I remember that in Grayling, when we were getting ready to go, Major Howe wouldn't sign off my paperwork because my hearing is so bad that they weren't going to let me deploy. And he was not going to sign off my paperwork. So I walk out, and I'm walking down the road in Grayling, and this full-bird colonel comes up to me and he goes, "How's it going, soldier?" And I'm like, "Not very good." He's like, "Why is that?" And I was like, "Major Howell won't sign off on my paperwork because he said I can't hear, but I have a waiver to get in the National Guard. So I wasted my time, 6 years of my life. I just want to deploy." So that colonel actually walked me all the way down to Major Howell and made Major Howell sign off on my paperwork to get deployed to Afghanistan. And like I said, after that, it was they cut our unit in half. So when we got back from deployment, our company wasn't like cohesive like it was, because you had the guys who went and the guys who didn't go, the guys who were with Charlie and the guys who were sent to another unit, And then you had the guys who were at fortitude during the attack and the guys who weren't at fortitude during the attack. And it just really splintered that entire company. And it's taken years for them to try to rebuild the cohesion again.
Yeah, I can see that. And you've had quite a lot of experiences over really a very short period of time. I mean, I like to say I'm not that very old, but you're not quite as old as I am, and to have all those things. Now, I want to go back though. You got out of the guard because you had custody of your sons. Were your sons glad to have you back? Was that a nice homecoming when you got back together with them?
It was, I think my youngest was 2 at the time when I got custody of him. And I just dedicated everything to giving them everything I didn't have. The same as my sister and my brother have done for their family. I seriously started out with 0 money, 0 retirement when I got divorced. And I would work all the overtime I could, made the right decisions, made sacrifices in my life to make sure that I achieved and was able to give them the things that I didn't have.
Well, very good. And so now you are still continuing to serve veterans. It's 2023, so we can't talk about you in retirement yet because you're still a young man. But what are you doing now as part of your service?
When I got home from the Navy, I had my medal to join the VFW, and I really wasn't treated very well. The World War II, Korea, and Vietnam guys, they just, they didn't care. I hadn't actually gone into combat, and that bothered me for quite a while. But then a few years ago, I was sitting down at one of the posts, and one of the family members came in and said, I want to join. My dad was in World War II, and they said, well, do you have this paper? And she goes, no, the DD-214. And they said, well, you can't join then. And it bothered me because they didn't tell them where to get it, how to get it, what it even was. So thankfully, my grandma bought me tons of books when I was little instead of toys. So I knew a lot about history. And after being in the Navy and the Army, I knew a lot of military history on top of that. So I started for free helping these people file for paperwork and letting them know that, hey, your family member is also entitled to these awards. And this is how you do it. And, you have to look up here. To see them get excited when I show them their veterans combat patch, or their regiment crest or a picture of their ship, that brings me so much happiness because they're discovering their family military history. And I tell them, go join the VFW and the AMVETS and the Legion because your family earned the right to join these places. And the scholarships that those organizations give out and the youth programs that they have are just amazing. So me and my girlfriend, Michelle, started visiting all the Legion and VFW and military social clubs that we could. We're losing so many at such a fast rate that we document them. So we put them on Instagram and Facebook and do Google reviews, show the posts how to do reviews, how to update their Google hours and post numbers, because we want to save these, because it's going to be, the math is just not there. If you look at how many veterans in World War II, which the number is thrown around is 16 million. You had 16 million people get in and out of the military in essentially a 5-year span. If you add up all the guys from Vietnam, all the guys from Korea, Persian Gulf, Panama, Iraq, Afghanistan, that's a 60-year span, and it's half the number than World War II. And most people we talk to don't even know that they can join these clubs, you know? And I think it's sad that no one was helping them discover their military history because they had nobody to turn to. So that's what we've been really working on, is finding the easiest way to get the paperwork, explaining what awards that they should be getting, and explaining the benefits that they should be getting, and how to get in touch with veteran service officers. A lot of veterans don't know what a veteran service officer is, and that's the person that's supposed to help them navigate the VA. They just passed benefits for children of Vietnam vets that have Agent Orange, that had birth defects. They're entitled to those benefits. The PACT Act that just started, 2 of the places I was on are on there, but it's also covering, I think, people from that were stationed on Guam, Vietnam, you know, and no one knows that these benefits exist for them. And I mean, I haven't even scratched the surface of the benefits that veterans can get, but they don't know.
Right. And so you're out there, even after service, serving all of our veterans. And it sounds like you've had a pretty interesting and full life. Before we close out our discussion today, though, is there anything, so when someone listens to this 100 years from now, or 50 years from now, or even 10 years from now, is there a message you'd like them to take away from all of the service that you've done and from this conversation we've had today?
I think a big thing is, you never know when someone's having the worst day of their life. And it might just be you listening to them or helping them discover something new that could save them. I've lost a lot of friends to PTSD, more than I care to count, over the past few years. And sometimes you're the only one that's keeping them on that day from doing something irreversible. So just try to live your life as if someone's just having the worst day of their life, and you just listening to them is going to help them. Be morally right, and you can't really go wrong as long as you listen to yourself and do the moral thing. It might not be the easiest thing, but it's usually the best thing.
To listen to this full story, or to hear the stories of other veterans, go to www.veteransarchives.org and click on the Media tab.